We had a great conversation during the warm-up. What were we talking about?
It was great. If you weren't there, sorry you missed it. You mean today?
Yes.
Yeah. We were talking about death.
Yes.
We were talking about Adrian Piper,
Jose Munoz.
Jose Munoz. Mm-hmm.
But it went places, and I only bring it up because I realized, and Kayvon was tuned into this. He was back there doing his practice warm up, and I was like, oh, I have to not. This is not the space that this dance asks for, of this like this cerebral nature. So then I noticed that in a video I was watching today. I was like, oh, what I just said to you. I'm thinking. I can see that I'm thinking in that video, and it's like a subtle postural, maybe even it's definitely postural. It's like the alignment of my head. I can tell that I'm leading from here. And so after we had our great conversation, I had to drop underneath that. And I'm curious, just in an improvisational performance, we kind of spoke about this yesterday. How do we gauge this? Like, I have so much trust in Kayvon. And it was like the process of going through this and continuing to go through this was. So I remember early on, he started in like one of our first rehearsals. He started making some sounds, and I was like, "Oh, is that a part of this dance? Like what is that?" Like, and I was like, "Okay, sure." Like I could. It wasn't about doing this to the material. It was more like that, and then like that or something, so like the containers, you get that physically. Can I do the whole thing in body language? All the responses. So the dropping below, I just felt, okay, I'm going to do that. And also we did this yesterday, and to accept that, okay, it's going to be different today, and it's different. I mean, there's like sort of a subtle structure-ish.
Call it an island.
Yes, there's like one island in the dance, but everything else is pretty. Cheers. It's just we don't know. So that's kind of the place I don't know. But it does feel like this thing, like we just have to keep doing it to know it, but it's not about like, let's write down a piece, like get a piece of paper and like write everything down. Like that is somewhat part of it too. Like I can't deny that that's what we were talking about too. Creative, we were talking about where that happens in the body. So I am still understanding the parameters because it has parameters, a lot of which depend on, I think, also that we've known each other for 20 years and we met in a dancing context. So that history is there.
Yeah, and we were also talking about affect. That was a large part of our conversation and like what that means, how it translates in a practice. I just felt compelled in your talking to like go back to my notebook and find another Lisa Robertson poetry quote. If you have rarely tried to speak of it, it's because form requires of you a reticence. And tonight I felt there was like a lot more vocal work happening and and a different energy. So not to keep comparing anything to last night, but I'll say that there was a shimmering happening and a different, at least from my...
So sweaty?
No, I'm talking about like a physical sensation. So the other night in rehearsal, I was like, oh, there were flecks of heat, like emanating from just what I was like watching and how just trying to be aware of my own reorganization. And also trying to tune in to this like 20-year knowing and how that keeps knowing, like how this becomes a space of knowing within improvisation.
I want to change that to feeling, only because it just reminds me of I guess it's the E. Cummings quote that we've been reading a lot, which is like, I'm just gonna paraphrase it however I can, like to know, to think, and to believe you can be any number of people, but to feel you can be nobody but yourself. And he says something like, in a world that is constantly trying to make you be other people, like feeling is like the most radical act.
Right.
And to be nobody but yourself is a radical act. I feel like that practice of like 20 years of trying to just be nobody but ourselves.
It's true. Like I back when we have our green room back there, I was in the warm up space back there. I was like, oh, this really, I can only do this 100% comfortably around Kayvon. Because I feel like we did this 18 years ago.
Yeah.
Like being back there, making noises. As much as I love this group, the BB Miller Company that I was dancing with over the past 2 years, I would just get self-conscious. Like I'd be like, like doing that as my warm-up, and they're kind of like, and I love that triple canopy. Today, I was so comfortable. I was like, Josue's right there. I'm going to just drop into my thing. He's on his phone. So there's, I don't even know where that started from, but
Feeling.
Yeah, so it's and that is that space for healing is that like container of safety. Like I am safe to feel right now.
Yeah, emotionally, I did observe. I have such a hard time. That tells you more about me than it tells you about the piece. I'm sorry.
I won't hold you to using that word.
I want to go with the kind of terms you set up and add to them too and expand upon them. There was a feeling of being reorganized by what took place tonight in a different way than last night, even as there were certain thematic or like aesthetic elements that reoccurred. Certain mood shifts, like music cues that were similar. Again, just trying to observe what stays the same, and yet what stays the same creates certain kind of conditions for change, for still like a transformation, and for this deeper feeling to keep moving, to keep shifting, to keep reorganizing. I'll ask one more question maybe before opening it up to the audience. In terms of the brain-body hierarchy, and maybe we've already spoken to this, but we can go deeper if that feels like where we want to go. How through this research process can you disturb that, or can you destabilize a brain-body hierarchy?
You feel it.
By being aware of it?
Yeah, it's
like
just
if I'm
like
a dancer and I
track.
want to learn.
Okay, yeah. So I think when I started kind of playing with things by myself, and those drawings that I sent to you, it was just like, it's really kind of like a lesson in improvisation, but for me it was, I would set the timer and I would either move or draw and then kind of go through my memory of how I was tracking my consciousness, because I'm more interested, well, it's a funny thing, it's like I'm interested in choreographing the consciousness that's organizing the dance rather than the material. So how do I register that consciousness is what I'm still curious about, because this thing we were talking about with affect, or what shifts into the organizing of aesthetic, or from what part of our body do we start to access that or register that, because we're also holding that lightly, or I don't know how we're holding it, like we're holding it. Mm-hmm. We're letting it emerge too. So it's when I've tried to like set an order to what we do, it just kills it. And I just realized that that's not speaking to the questions that we're asking. So, what was your question again? How do you what? Sorry, I got lost all the time.
Don't apologize. How do you disturb the hierarchy of brain body that often dictates what we do, how we heal, how we feel about healing, narratives around like what my body is doing right now?
Well, the mind likes to control also. So thinking and speaking actually are often ways to distract us from feeling or from being present. Like you can feel that like jump. Like I get uncomfortable. Like I'm gonna start talking about this thing. And it's great. It's a great tool, to like drop into that. It reminds me of this. I was with my friend Miguel Gutierrez, and I think he gave me I feel like it's in this book, but I could not find it again. It was my birthday, and he gave me, what's that polyamory book? I didn't end up practicing. Yes, The Ethical Slut. Is there something in that book about a practice of listening where like you leave time? I mean, it's like that book is not the only place that says that, but you leave time, and we're like, oh, let's try it. So we're just eating dinner, and it got so intimate. I was like, oh, you know.
What did you try?
Sorry, what?
What did you try?
We tried not speaking. we tried to not, like, to really listen. It leaves you very naked. So I feel like one of the things we're also trying to do with, like, I'm kind of just articulating this now, is to like not, there's all these practices that I feel like I know from healing too, that I'm just like, we're just like putting into this space, and it's like it's a living space that turns into a dance or something. So we are trying to listen and then be present with each other as people when we're dancing and when we're not dancing. You know.
Kayvon.
You can disagree with that.
Well, no, I don't disagree at all. But the listening for me is not a listening from one focal point. When I feel like I practice non-hierarchy, and I try and I practice and I give time to a kind of a roundtable discussion with all of the cells in my body, all of the organs in my body, all of the intelligence, like they're all listening to each other and to my neocortex, and there is a complex dialogue of listening and collaboration, and yeah, and I feel like that, you know, with so many structures in place that are this like the pyramid top-down hierarchy, I feel like I want to practice something else and see how that can influence the way I relate.
I want to ask one more selfish question, and this could be like a simple answer, or not. You could say I don't want to answer, but I'm curious. Like, what did you hear?
What did I hear?
Yeah, like what was one thing you heard tonight? Like at the round table.
Oh, it'd be tricky to put it to language, because like it would be my neocortex's interpretation of what the cells are saying to each other, but it is a kind of I guess, but this is encompassing not just what I heard today, but what I feel like I hear in general is there's this a kind of, and we talk about it in this work, and in each dance having a blueprint, and each moment I feel like for me there is a blueprint towards healing, towards health, and in the context of the dance I feel there's a blueprint for this dance. Sorry. You can start. Yeah. But that we can align ourselves and the constellations of all of the factors, not just us, but all the eyes watching and all the consciousnesses in the room, that there's something that can happen that can only happen in this room and only with these people. And what is that blueprint, and how do we find that?
I was also going to say my question was redundant because in the performance you already told us what you heard.
Right.
With that, I'll open it up to the audience. Questions?
I was curious about the role of the recorded audio and how that played into your timing and your play with each other.
Usually when I'm making something, I start to collect sounds, and it's this convoluted relationship I seem to have to starting with a sound designer right away or not. And it becomes a problem for us in some ways because no one is operating the sound except for us. And it is that, yeah, ideally there would be an emergent composition also. Maybe ideally, maybe not. I don't know. It's real, you know, like it's a real reality that this thing is here and someone has to press play and someone from over there maybe has to walk over there to play it. So either we keep learning how to deal with that. I don't know. I'm curious about bringing someone in. Some of the bells are, well, actually, Marion did one of the bells for me. Ding! That one, Marion was helping me at a residency at Summer Stages Dance at the ICA Boston this summer. So that bell's from Marion. But then there's also bells from a sound designer I worked with in my last solo, and he was in Japan and recorded bells and monks chanting, and the bells that they were using, and these bells were very intentionally cast. And I feel like there is something real about that. You know, it's not like the thing you pick up at Pearl River Mart. You know, it's like there's a lot of intention that went into, there was chanting that went into the bell. It's like that if you know the Dr. Emoto, who does the chanting of or the intentions and how they change the structure of water crystals. So that's some of that. There's some whale sounds that I just bought one day. Yeah, there's some songs. There's another recording that Curtis made. And so that's just kind of the soup for now until we meet again.
Thank you so much for your work tonight. It was really beautiful. I was thinking the whole time about freedom and madness and feeling and absorbing the responses of the room to you and feeling the freedom of your choices or your desiring toward freedom. And that's sort of the context for my question, which is I think so much about listening, and I'm constantly wondering if it's possible to do a kind of speaking that is a listening, and what kind of risks toward madness are involved in that desire, like what kind of listening you need to do for your language to be attending radically to someone or something. And so I'm wondering, like, do you think of the movement here? I mean, do you think of your movements and your responsiveness as a form of listening or wanting to be moving as listening? And obviously listening we're just using an ear as metaphor because the body is sensing in all of these ways, just like we overuse sight as a metaphor. Yeah, that's my question.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is something I talked about last night. I didn't even look up the author, but I'm using this phrase that be impeccable with your word. And I feel like that prompt for me is about a certain kind of clarity of intention with words. And the reason for that is to create a resonant space where truth is resonant, therefore listening and connecting is resonant. That felt a little theoretical, but that's how I'm putting it together at this moment.
I can say in a performing space, sometimes I'm remembering when we were here and I just started kind of screaming. So I'm observing that as it's happening. And I don't know what this is, if it's like I've had this happen before in performing where maybe it's like, and sometimes it's, I think, in a moment that's more heightened, that it's simultaneously happening and then I'm kind of outside observing it. Or I'm like, oh, and it's, but the outside observing is sort of like a swallowing of it and it continues. And then I was like, oh, I'm going back. And I was like, oh, we have sheep sounds. So, so I was like, I'm gonna play the sheep sounds. I don't know if anyone picked that up. But I think, I think that's a tricky space for me inside of this because it's that thing that I spoke about earlier. I can tell when I'm trying to organize it just here rather than perceiving it as it arises. So I don't know, like this thing that Kayvon's talking about with a bell, like we can have those resonances intersecting. Maybe they amplify one another like harmony, or maybe they cancel each other out. Like that's a literal thing with sound waves, I believe. That kind of resonance. I think that is kind of an interesting word in thinking about that.
Hey, I would love to hear you guys talk about sort of the interaction between healing and performance, and maybe sort of like when performance might be helpful for healing and when it might hinder healing, and yeah, how those two things are interacting for you two in your process.
So I just like contextually, because of injuries, I always was looking at how to tend to methods to let myself keep dancing. And it led me to have to understand the body in different ways than simply a Western model. So one, like from injuries major injuries happening maybe at 16 years old to now, it's like this thing about when I'm working with people, I'm working with consciousness. So I don't go in and massage someone's knee when it hurts. I ask the body through a very specific protocol what needs to happen, and it may not address the knee at all. But that's the body's wisdom. So one of our scores is to work with this thing that I borrow this term from the Body Talk system, of the body's innate wisdom that is always guiding you towards your healing or your potential, but we don't know what that looks like. So there's no preconceived notion of what it means to heal, which is counter to the aims of Western medicine, which I feel like is very detrimental also at times. Not always, but if we really talk to the person's innate wisdom via their body, there's a knowing there. So I guess in part it's like looking at that desire for something to be a certain way, like to remove that from the dance. What was the prompt that you said today? Tangible outcomes. Let's remove the pressure for tangible outcomes. So that became sort of a sub-score. And I know from studying with different teachers, it is this thing that energy medicine is unpredictable. You can leave feeling amazing or you can leave feeling like crap, and the crap is also still very good, or it just is. So that becomes some of the sort of bedrock or framework for then how do we start to put this in a room, in a space, frame it, because we are actually making something that now exists as 35 minutes long or thereabouts, and these things kind of surface, and then I just keep kind of holding them in relationship to these questions. And really for this dance, it's so different for me because I'm not choreographing sections. I said this last night, we tried that already, but it killed the dance. It's like, this is not what it's about. So it's that. Like I've had other pieces where I got interested in, because I was working with, I was collaborating a lot with Ok-Young Lee, a cellist, and she could play over there like in the elevator and everyone would know what she was doing. But if I dance in the elevator, I was like, does anyone know what I'm doing? And it was in part because, never mind, I won't tell that story. Anyway, so I got curious about what are the effects, what are the invisible effects of my movement? So that led me to be like, maybe I'll look at sacred geometry. I don't know how that happened. But then someone's like, no, look at biogeometry. So I actually got a grant to go study that, and that's the study of the qualitative architectures that surround us. They're energetic, like all the frequencies that we're interacting with. So then I was like, okay, how can a dance relate to that? So then maybe that was like a direct application. We're gonna make a score that responds to that question. Or I know I'm interested, like there's also this thing about, that was like a hodgepodge, like fractals too, I was interested in that, and like these architected, more like formal designs. And this just feels a little bit more like, thanks, Lindsay. She's been helping me write some grants. Trying to put this all in the language. Does that answer your question?
Okay. So just one more reminder that Michelle will be at Eden's Expressway tomorrow doing Body Talk.
An open movement.
An
you
open
can come and
movement.
sleep on the floor. People do that. You don't have to know how to dance at all.
10 a.m.
10 a.m.
to 12 p.m. -ish.
12 p.m.
I know how these things work. I love movement research, and I may be there. So with that, thank you for coming. Stick around, get another drink if you like, and thank you.
Thank you. I have to say, let me just say this too, like a thank you to Triple Canopy, because I just feel so much gratitude being housed in this organization that is really pro asking the questions. Like never did I feel pressure to make a product, which of course here's a product, but it just thank you. She's great. This is a good organization.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.